Thank you for joining us on LinkedIn Live and Twitter for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, The Convergence of Media and Commerce. I'm your host, Jeremy Goldman, eMarketer Principal Analyst at Insider Intelligence in our Times Square office. And I'm joined by my colleague, Principal Analyst Andrew Lipsman in Chicago. Hi, Andrew. Great to have you here.
Hey, Jeremy. Great to be with you.
And first, I'd like to thank Reddit for making today's webinar possible. We'll be hearing later on from Jack Koch, Global Head of Marketing Sciences at Reddit. Hi, Jack. As you can see from Jack's background, he's joining us from the West Village, 3 miles south.
Great to be here, Jeremy. Thanks for having us.
Just a few things before we dive in. We have a ton of information to share, but you don't need to take notes. We'll email you a link to view the slides and the full recording afterwards, but we do want you to participate. Just use the window on the lower right-hand side of the screen to submit questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A. And if your colleagues haven't registered yet, but they still want to, no problem. Just share the link that you used to register. So with that, Andrew, let's get started. What's on the agenda today?
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. So we're going to be talking about the convergence of media and commerce. This is one of my favorite topics, by the way. I'm really thinking about this as a mega trend that's affecting so many aspects of media advertising and commerce today. So what I'm going to do is walk through a few different sections of content. The first one is me laying out what I call the new media value chain. And that's really going to kind of set the structure for what we're going to talk about today. Then we're going to talk about the rise of social commerce. Social commerce is probably the most prominent manifestation of media and commerce convergence that we're seeing today. Then we'll unpack that a little bit further and talk about what's happening on the major social platforms, which are innovating quite a bit at the moment around shoppable content and checkout specifically. The last piece is that we will talk about the power of trust and influence, because checkout is really the hard part, but the most important part of social commerce. So what role does trust and influence play at the middle and bottom of the funnel to drive conversion? So with that, let's talk about the new media value chain. So I'm going to divide this into two sections, and I'll start by talking about this kind of top line, which is, I would say, the old media value chain, or maybe the traditional media value chain. And I'm going to show how, in traditional terms, we moved from content, which can be both ads and editorial type of content or programming, and how that moved through the path to purchase to commerce. So in the old world model, content was fundamentally supply constrained. It was static, it was bundled. Think of what we were getting through our cable bundle, through your newspaper bundle, and it wasn't very dynamic content. The distribution was hard. It was very physical and capital intensive. You needed a printing press, you needed to lay cable. And then it traversed through media platforms, predominantly linear TV and print. Again, these were supply constrained. And then it reached audiences. Those audiences were all about reach and mass audiences. And if there was any specificity to it, it was kind of loose demographic based on age and gender. And then when people actually transacted from the products that they saw, it was done in physical stores. So that's the old model. The new model is one in which content is in infinite supply in this new digital paradigm. That content is very dynamic. It is atomized, so it does not have to be bundled. You might just see a single article traversing through the web, a single program. And the distribution then is digital and very asset light, so anyone has access to it. The media that we are typically seeing this through is streaming video and social media platforms. And then the audiences that can be reached are often they're addressable audiences. You can reach niche, interest-based audiences. And then how people transact as a result of that is through both physical stores and e-commerce. So if you think about content and commerce, they're really coming together here in this digital environment. Those middle parts of the chain really are kind of collapsing, and you can go very quickly from content to commerce, particularly when it's e-commerce. So it's a very short path to purchase, at least theoretically. One additional point that I'll make here is that because content is in infinite supply, there's the hard part for brands is really how do you break through? And so we've seen in this audience component the importance of influence, and more specifically, the influencer, which is any sort of a trusted personality who can kind of help a brand break through and reach those niche audiences that you want to, and also provide that kind of trust and consideration that helps a brand actually drive through to conversion at the end of that path to purchase. We'll talk more about that later, but I just want to lay out that idea. So in speaking to Randall Rothenberg, the executive chair of the IAB last year, he had this great quote that I've used a number of times now, where he said, "The medium is the store and the store is the medium. The biggest change we saw in 2020, and it's a real acceleration, is that the brand distribution supply chain and brand awareness supply chain are collapsing into each other. They're now kind of the same thing. The simplest way to think about it is that it's all about that screen we're looking at." I thought that encompassed nicely, this collapsing of the value chain, and really it's just all about the fact that you can have that content right on your phone and take action almost immediately. Let's talk about the rise of social commerce now. So social has become an increasingly important driver in building brands and then commerce specifically. So if we look at some referral data here from Adobe over the last 3 years or so, social used to be a pretty much a rounding error in terms of its share of referral activity to e-commerce sites, just 3% back at the end of 2016. As we follow that trend through into the beginning part of 2020, you can see it got as high as 8.2% in Q1. Now you'll notice a dip there in Q2. That was the pandemic quarter, of course. And what happened there was just that you had this influx of e-commerce traffic, and at the same time, a big pullback in ad spending. So ads do drive some of those clicks to e-commerce sites. So that just created a temporary blip. It's not symptomatic of kind of the ongoing trend. There is an ongoing trend in the direction of social driving commerce. So we at eMarketer have our own forecast for social commerce sales, and I'll walk you through that very quickly here. So in 2020, you will see that there was a clear acceleration with about a 38% growth rate to almost $27 billion in sales. And that compares to the overall e-commerce growth rate of about 34%. So it was a few percentage points higher. In 2021, we're seeing that growth rate stay very elevated at about 35%. Now that compares to a forecast of total e-commerce growth of about 14%. So several multiples higher. So what's the difference? Broadly speaking, it's apparel. Apparel had a tougher year in 2020. We didn't have a huge demand to wear new clothes, but we expect that to reverse, and that's really going to help prop up the growth of social commerce in 2021. And then those growth rates are going to stay pretty strong through 2023. So it's growing fast. There's a nice trend here in the US, but really, China is the model for social commerce. If we look here to the left and you see what penetration of e-commerce sales are coming through social commerce in China, this year we expect it to be about 13%. So 1 out of every $8 in e-commerce is coming through social commerce. In the US, it'll be just 4.3%, so about 3 times lower. If you look at the total amount of social commerce sales in China versus the US in 2021, it's actually a 10x difference, almost exactly. China will have 363 billion to the US is 36 billion. Why so much bigger? Well, China's e-commerce market is also 3 times bigger. So 3 times higher penetration, 3 times the size of the market gets you to about a 10x difference.
By the way, quick question, Andrew. In what ways is the US market trying to learn from China's social commerce success?
Yeah, well, so interestingly, a couple of years ago, Jessica Lessin, the editor-in-chief of the Information, was kind of advising Facebook, saying Facebook really needs to follow the model of WeChat. And WeChat is this kind of all-encompassing, all-in-one chat, social platform in China that's driving a lot of this behavior. And she was saying that China should follow that, or that Facebook should follow that lead. And then I think in 2019, there was some conversation on social media where that came up again. And Mark Zuckerberg actually chimed in and said, Jessica, we actually should have followed your guidance a few years ago. So that's really what the social platforms today, I think, are after. They're thinking about that. And some of the dynamics in China that have spurred this are very unique. But as you watch the innovation, you're going to see a lot of models that are following what's happened there. So let's understand exactly how social commerce adoption is increasing here in the US. If we look back before the pandemic, about 24% of people had engaged in a social commerce transaction ever. As we got into the middle of the pandemic, in August, that number had already climbed to 36%. So that's a pretty significant increase in a relatively short period of time. We also asked about regular social commerce usage. Now, those numbers are a lot lower. You still see a nice trend. It went from 5% to 9% during that time. But it's a nice reminder that social commerce is promising, it's growing, but because it's not a routine behavior for most people yet, that's why it's not going to become sort of a dominant e-commerce behavior overnight. Now, the categories that are most affected by this, not surprisingly, I've already alluded to it, apparel and accessories. This far and away dominates with over 55% of total social actions in retail categories. So this is where the activity is happening, where people are engaging as it pertains to retail. Consumer electronics, surprisingly high. That's number 2 at 15%. That's driven a lot by gaming consoles. There's a lot of activity around that, and audio. People are pretty engaged in speakers and headphones and things of that nature. And then sporting goods and equipment. Think about brands like Nike, Peloton, Adidas. They're big players here as well. Okay, so now we're going to talk more about the platforms themselves and specific innovations in shoppable content and checkout. So when I think about social platforms, I tend to think of it along 2 dimensions of scale and context. So the platform that really drives scale, not surprisingly, is Facebook. It's always been the biggest, the most activity happens there, and it's always funneled the most clicks overall to retail sites. At the other end of the spectrum, some of the platforms are really good at providing that contextual relevance. I think the best example here is Pinterest, which really aligns around this shopping use case where a lot of the activity people are engaging in, whether it's a home decor project, DIY, cooking, putting together a specific fashion look, all these things you can draw a direct line to commerce. So those are generally the trade-offs that you think about with respect to platforms. So here's a view looking at the advertising experience across many of the top social platforms. And so this comes from our US Digital Trust Survey from late last year. And we're looking at 2 dimensions where we asked survey respondents to rate each of the platforms on advertising relevance and ad experience. This was on a 5-point scale. You can see most of these numbers are in the 4-point range. So they tend to fare well overall, but we're going to present this in a way that provides some differentiation. And what I want to draw your eye to here is the top right corner. You'll see that Instagram and Pinterest really are in that top right. So they're kind of performing the best overall, that mix of ad relevance and ad experience. And it's not surprising maybe that is, I think, the 2 core platforms where social commerce really started to be born from, because they do have that contextual relevance, perhaps more so than other channels. So here's a look at shoppable content. This has been one of the ways that these platforms have been innovating. On the left, you're seeing some Nike sneakers on Instagram, and on the right, you're taking a look at some home decor imagery on Pinterest. And you see how in both examples, there's a way to kind of tap and engage and find out more about the products. What they have in common is that they are, the imagery is really kind of striking and catches your attention. And then you have a way to kind of click and find out more, so you can move a little bit deeper through the funnel and into that consideration phase. It's not just that sort of static content, it's also shoppable video. So we're seeing a lot of marketers move in that direction. And some IAB data from last year actually showed what percentage of US agency and marketing professionals were using shoppable video ads. And you can see it's a steady climb from 25% in 2018 to 40% in 2020. So there's really a chance here for the sight, sound, and motion of video to more deeply engage people and spur them to action and maybe be more likely to convert as a result of that. But it's not just that digital video, it's also TV. So we're seeing a lot of interesting experimentation in shoppable TV these days. Amazon has a couple of examples here. They released a show last year with Heidi Klum and Tim Gunn making the cut, which was a fashion competition. At the end of each episode, the winning fashion actually could be bought directly through Amazon. So that was a way of having content and commerce, directly adjacent to it. There was Rihanna's lingerie line. They did a fashion show before the holiday season, and you could actually buy those wares through Amazon during and after the show. NBCU has introduced some shoppable ad units that you can see up here on the top right. They did this during the French Open in 2019, where you could use QR codes to basically buy the Lacoste gear that was being worn during that transmission. So the hardest part of all this, right, we can put the content next to the checkout and try and make it as easy as possible, but checkout is still very tricky. We did a survey to ask people, well, have you actually transacted through the top social platforms? And what we found, this is over the past year, that the numbers weren't especially high. Now you can see Facebook was the most likely. So in this case, a scale one out, 18% of people said they had transacted via Facebook. And that could have been, a click through from an ad to the retailer's site and not necessarily native to Facebook. Instagram second at 11%, and then Pinterest third at about 3%. So what makes these transactions hard? Most often, people are saying that they're more likely to do an impulse purchase. So that was the top way that people had actually described their most recent social commerce purchase, 35%. If you think about an impulse purchase, you have to go through the whole purchase funnel all at once, right? You have to see something, like it, want to explore it, and then move all the way to purchase, kind of all in that instance. That's very hard to do, right? This isn't grabbing a pack of gum at the checkout counter at the grocery store. It's happening in a different environment. It's probably a higher ticket and higher consideration purchase. So it's just hard to do. But each of the other three options actually were instances where people maybe were already in the consideration phase, considering a brand or a product, and the ad or the content that they saw gave them that prompt they needed to remind them to say, actually, you wanted to purchase this thing, and then they completed the transaction as a result of that. A lot of social commerce buyers don't want to transact directly over the platform. So they're not really interested in native checkout on social commerce. If we asked them what their most recent purchase was, how do they do it? And 58% of them said that they actually clicked through to the retailer's website. You can imagine a lot of times people might want to look at different sizes, colors, variations, maybe other products that the retailer site have. Only 19% of the time did they purchase natively through that social platform. So now we're going to talk in this last section about the power of trust and influence. So we'll start off talking about influencer marketing at a very high level. I'm going to take the conversation beyond what we traditionally think of in influencers in a moment. But if we look at this chart here to the right, almost every brand or marketer is doing some form of social media marketing today, 91, 92%. But if you look at the percentage who are doing influencer marketing, we've passed 50% threshold to 62%, 68% we expect it to be this year, and almost 73% by 2022. So that has really mainstreamed in a way that we haven't seen before. But we do need to think more about how we want to define what an influencer is. So I think some of the best examples of influencers in my expanded definition are some of these celebrities who have launched brands. Ryan Reynolds with Aviation Gin, Jessica Alba with The Honest Company, and Kylie with Kylie Cosmetics. These are all billion or near billion-dollar brands today. And they were driven in large part by these celebrities. But they weren't just celebrity spokespeople. They had authenticity. They were part and parcel to the brand. And I think that was a big part of what really helped them break through and supercharge that brand and make customers interested. So that trust factor really, I think, was important.
By the way, let me just jump in. I'm wondering, obviously the examples you have here, quite a bit of reach, but you also mentioned domain expertise. Is it safe to say that some influencers are highly influential in one way, but far less so in another?
Absolutely, right. Not everyone's going to have domain expertise in everything. And what's interesting here is that these aren't necessarily things that the celebrities were known for originally, but they do have a passion about a certain type of product or product line. So they kind of gain that domain expertise. Another influencer I think about is Chrissy Teigen, who does a lot of cooking, right? I don't even know the genesis of her doing cooking. I just see it through social media. And it's clearly authentic to her. It is part of what she does, and she makes a lot of really good looking food. So I think people really buy into that when they know that it's authentic to their personality. Another interesting manifestation of media and commerce convergence by way of influencers is the digital home fitness trend. So if you think about what's happened with Peloton and also with Lululemon and their recent acquisition of Mirror, is all of a sudden you have these fitness media experiences where what you're seeing on that media experience is an influencer. In this case, the Peloton instructor, who people often have a deep affinity for, and they're able to influence their behavior. By the way, they're also wearing Peloton apparel. So there's this adjacency with commerce that can certainly be influenced by these personalities because of the relationship that they have with that consumer on the other end of the screen. So ultimately, it's this depth of connection, the depth of engagement that I think is really critical in driving, that last part of the bottom of the funnel and getting people over the hump to purchase. One example that I think is really interesting is a new startup called Network. And what it is a live virtual event platform, but it's also a commerce platform. And the whole idea is they host these events around pop culture type events, often built around an artist or a musician, somebody who has a deep and loyal following, and people want to engage with them in these events. But then they'll also do these kind of limited edition product drops, and people just will drop hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars on art. And these events have consistently, I think, driven hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single occasion, just because there's such a strong depth of connection. And I love this quote from the president of Network, Moshe Fitzgibbons, where he said, "I'd rather be an inch wide and a mile deep than a mile wide and an inch deep." I really believe that depth of connection, particularly around commerce, is just wildly important. So real influence requires trust, but not surprisingly, maybe most consumers are pretty skeptical of social media influencers. I thought this finding was very stark when people were asked to what extent they trusted social media influencers. 69% said they had no trust whatsoever, and only 2% that said that they did trust, right? So social media influencers might be good at getting attention, but they may not actually be able to persuade people to make a purchase. When people were asked in this research from Global Web Index what qualities are most important for social media influencers, trust jumped right up to the top at 48%, but they also want them to be informative. So, I think this kind of gets into that domain expertise, or at least being able to provide the information to move people a little bit further through the middle of that funnel. So what does influence look like when it isn't authentic? I love this example from Scott Disick, who was doing some sponsored content with this protein powder. I think it was called Booty Shake. And the hilarity of it is that when he posted this to social media, he just copy and pasted what the PR person probably teed up for him, giving him the instructions around posting and then what he's supposed to say. And he just posted that all in there, and people were kind of laughing at it on social media. Clearly, it was very inauthentic in the way that he did it. I don't think people necessarily think he was using the product, So I would say it provided maybe some cheap awareness. He has a lot of followers, so maybe there was some reach. But I don't know how many people are going to be persuaded to say, this is really the product for me because Scott Disick is using it. So what does influence actually look like? Most often, it's friends, family, and colleagues. We know this. We trust them the most. So it's all about trust. But what about when it isn't those people? Who else can be relied upon for trust in terms of shopping? And you see the data points that I highlighted here were an employee in a store or fellow consumers online. And you think about all the content that's getting created online through ratings and reviews, in-depth discussions around different products or brands. It's all out there to be influenced. And as long as people are credible and they're perceived by their audience to be credible, they can play a role in this. So those random employees in a store or consumers online actually more influential than an influencer in this case. So let's wrap it up with some key takeaways here. I just want to underscore this point about media, commerce, and convergence. There is this new media value chain that I think is really important to wrap all our heads around as brands, and understanding there's potential in the fact that this path to purchase has really shortened, and there's an opportunity for brands. So the question is, how do they do that? The first step, I think, is really making your content shoppable. How do you make sure that those consumers who might be interested in your brand don't just see it, they can engage and consider it in a way that provides depth of engagement. And then the last piece is, how do you get them over the hump to actually convert? Think about the importance of trust and how that drives influence. So how do people engage with influencers or other people who can provide that level of trust so that they will actually convert at the end of the day? And so with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jeremy.
I just got to say that was really great. Thank you so much. And before we get to some questions from our audience, we're now joined by Jack Koch, Global Head of Marketing Sciences at Reddit. Welcome again, Jack. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy. And hello, everyone. Again, my name is Jack Koch, and I lead marketing sciences at Reddit. I'll be walking you through a recent study we conducted on the path to purchase and how all that influence Andrew just talked about drives action within communities like Reddit. So firstly, it's already been quite a year for Reddit. I think we've all seen that online communities have the enormous power to influence, be it navigating the pandemic, affecting the economy, and of course, commerce and how people purchase products and services. With over 100,000 communities dedicated to everything from investing to fashion to cooking to the Super Bowl, Reddit is a social media exception, Andrew, in that we are a mile wide and we are a mile deep. Now, all this power and influence from communities is something that we've known about for quite a while. First, in 2019, we partnered with YPulse on a study about the power of community, where we uncovered Reddit's unique role in users' lives. We found that people come to Reddit to be informed because they feel it's authentic and trustworthy, and this leads to actions like talking about brands and purchasing products. We also uncovered that brands can earn trust with consumers by participating on Reddit. Following that, in 2020, we released The Era of We with GWI, which dove into the rise of online communities and how people are moving away from me-centric social sharing and more towards we-centric community conversations. And this is because it's where users can be themselves, and that anonymity really does fuel authenticity. This research also found that brands are welcome in communities if they contribute and act authentically. So Reddit's value is in people coming to the platform to be informed by crowdsourced wisdom that they trust, which then influences actions. Now, to complete this arc, we wanted to explore what all this wisdom, trust, and influence leads to. So we set out to quantify Reddit's role in the consumer purchase journey, from everything from inspiration to purchase to future advocacy. And to do this, we partnered with Verto Analytics to observe almost 1,500 online purchase journeys. And then we compared journeys that included Reddit to journeys that included other social platforms. And here's what we found. So this infographic compares the % of the purchase journey spent in each stage for journeys that include Reddit on the right here in color versus those that include other social platforms without Reddit on the left here in black and white. We found that consumers that use Reddit in their journeys are more informed, they make faster, higher value purchases, and become stronger brand advocates after purchase. If we start at the top, we see that the inspiration stages look fairly similar between the two journeys. But once you move really down to the more research-centric stages, that's where things start to get really interesting. And we see Reddit consumers spending more time getting more informed. So the lighter orange here is the exploration stage, and that's where users are starting to learn more about the category and explore available features. In this stage, we observed Reddit users researching more brands through more research sessions compared to social platforms. And then when you get to the consideration stage in darker orange, where users are looking at specific brands and products, this peaks to users evaluating over 2 times as many brands in over 4 times as many research sessions. And this all leads to a more confident purchaser that makes their decision to purchase 9 times quicker. As for their purchase, it ends up being 15% more in value, and then becomes stronger brand advocates with a much higher net promoter score of the product they purchased. Now, to go a bit more into detail into the data behind all of this, we've organized this research into 4 key findings. Finding number 1, journeys that include Reddit are more intense and informative. So compared to social platforms, you'll see here on the left here, Reddit users spend 60% more of their journey in that consideration stage, which again, is the stage where they're comparing features of specific products and brands. On average, they're looking at 4 more brands during the entirety of their journey, and they're doing this over 16 more research sessions. So as you can see, in journeys that include Reddit, there's more opportunities for brands to get in front of engaged consumers. Finding number 2, users trust Reddit when it comes to information about products. So Verto found that 90% of users trust the product information on Reddit more than other sites and apps. And 85% of them said the reviews found on Reddit make them more likely to purchase a product compared to, again, other sites and apps. And why is this? Well, one user said the people who post on Reddit are passionate about the product category and know which ones are best. I can trust that their opinions aren't being paid for. Finding number 3, Reddit users are more informed and confident with their purchase. So as we saw earlier, Reddit users invest significant time researching product and brand options, leading to a more informed and confident buyer who purchases faster and spends more dollars on the right product for them. When you look at the data from the decision stage, which is the stage where users are confirming their purchase decisions, we see that once people decide which product to purchase, Reddit users make the actual purchase in less than a day, while social platform users spend over 6 days confirming their decision. Also, Reddit users end up spending almost $20 more on their final purchase. Now, this ability to make a quicker decision and purchase a higher value product all comes from them being more informed buyers that are confident that the product is right for them. And why is this? Well, on the right here, they say the information on Reddit made them very comfortable and confident in their final decision. And lastly, finding number 4, Reddit impacts post-purchase advocacy and brand sentiment. Verto found that consumers who used Reddit to validate their purchases end up being more satisfied buyers who end up having a 12% higher net promoter score for the product they purchased. They're also up to 12% more likely to speak positively about that product or brand online or offline. And why is this? Well, they say that Reddit's a community. You get a better understanding of anything on Reddit. Other sites don't have this. So as you can see, Reddit really does have a huge influence on commerce and the path to purchase. The trust and the authenticity of the platform leads to consumers that are more informed. They make faster, higher value purchases and become stronger brand advocates. And with that, this is what we have. I'll pass it back over to Jeremy for the next section of this webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really great. And I want to try to stump you with a question or two of my own. I was curious about like what key user trends you saw emerge on the platform as a result of the pandemic.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeremy, for that question. So during the pandemic, we saw more people than ever really before turn to Reddit for connection, community, and belonging, really when even now, that physical disconnection is really happening. People can't really see other people, so they're coming online for community. So there were really 5 stages that we saw and really are still seeing that last stage. So the first one is information gathering. We like to call information gathering. And that's people around the world turning to Reddit for COVID information about the virus. We saw up to a 50% surge in traffic in some areas of our site. The coronavirus communities were some of our fastest growing, really almost of all time. And what was really cool is to see really local community, COVID community sites pop up, dozens and dozens, so people could get that localized pandemic information that they really relied on. We saw our Ask Science community really pop, and that's because people were looking for truthful and honest information about the pandemic when the media was saying a lot of different things. And because of Reddit's technology, the upvote downvote system, really relevant and the right information bubbles up to the top. And people are still using Reddit for their main source of information for the pandemic. Number two, I love talking about, it's the snow day mentality, stage 2. And that's while people were nervous about the pandemic, there was some excitement about staying at home. Andrew, Jeremy, you probably had some of this, working from home, being able to spend time with family, watch some Netflix. So we saw a spike in entertainment communities, gaming communities, DIY, cooking, all this sort of thing. What we also saw was an increase in family and relationship communities. We saw traffic there too, because people were trying to deal with other people that they might be at home with. So that was interesting to see those sort of posts and people figuring out how to deal with other people. Number 3, the new normal, and I say normal with question marks at the end, that's on purpose. This reality of staying home really sets in, and people are like, is this really going to be my life from now on? So things around self-sustaining habits, how are they going to eat? How are they going to get places? How are they going to get food, stay informed, healthy, stay sane? We saw these sort of communities pop up. So fitness, cooking, cycling. Cycling was really big. People looking to fix their bicycles after a lot of time because that's how they would get around. Number 4, we saw stay-at-home culture evolving. So Reddit became the world's water cooler. Outside of just COVID, how did they get information that's important to them as well? We picked up phrases about nostalgia, such as "I miss sports." That really popped a lot. And then Zoom backgrounds is really interesting to see, and that's something that, of course, is really even pertinent today. And then lastly, the new normal, and that's without question marks. That's people realizing this is going to be our future for a long time, and this is the stage we're in right now. People moving forward with their lives, things like haircuts, home cooking, television, people binging all the shows that they watch and now trying to find new shows, right? These are all the things that we're still seeing. But what was really cool to see and really interesting to see that we see now are brands meeting the moment. Companies really meeting people where they need to be. So we saw companies step up, for example, in surprise and delighting. We saw companies like cosmetic brands surprising users with double orders, right? And people posting on Reddit about that. And that really was a success for them. We saw where tourist attractions and tourism is down, we saw brands like Disney providing value, providing recipes for some of their in-park food. We saw them providing bedtime stories featuring some of their favorite characters. And then brands like Netflix got on Reddit, and as people were looking for the next show to binge, they were providing support. You could say what TV shows you like to watch, and they would provide individual personalized answers on what your next show maybe should be on Netflix. So the brands that we see having success now really started a lot of that during the pandemic and meeting the moment. That trend is going to continue.
I think that's a really good point. I actually want to ask something of both you guys and bring Andrew into this, how the e-commerce journey has shifted as a result of all of this, because I feel that people are using platforms like Reddit, other social platforms and the like to do research in different ways. So how has the e-commerce journey changed?
Absolutely. Andrew, do you mind if I take this first?
Go for it.
Fantastic. So I'm actually going to leverage what you said earlier. I mean, no doubt the biggest shift during the pandemic is the decrease in physical shopping and the move to e-commerce. Almost half of consumers now are shopping more online than they did before the pandemic. People can't go into the stores. They can't physically touch. They can't see things. As Andrew mentioned, impulse purchases are down as well. But the biggest one, and Andrew again talked about this, is regardless of the product category, people are doing a lot more research now before they buy, and that trend is going to continue. People have a lot more information at their fingertips now. You can do all of that research really quickly. And what we're seeing now is consumers not doing that research, but they're trying to figure out where should they trust? What should they trust? What's the most trustworthy place for them to feel really confident in their decision? And even more so, what's not trustworthy, right? What media sites, what influencers, what media or social platforms might be not trustworthy. And that's where we see people moving away from, again, those me-centric social sites where people, actually influencers just talk at a lot of people. We see people moving towards we-centric community conversations where there's a dialogue and the most relevant information can surface.
Yeah, I mean, this is all absolutely true. I think so much more pre-shopping for a trip. When people actually go into stores, they're very deliberate in what they want to go in, find it, and get out as quickly as possible. So what we've lost in the physical store experience is that consideration phase, right? Most people would say, oh, I need something, I'll go into the store. Then they sit there and explore the shelves, maybe talk to somebody who could help them there. That's where consideration happened. That has basically completely ported over to digital. The vast majority of that today is happening in digital. And let's be honest, some of that behavior will stay even as shopping normalizes. The behavior, I think, has become so entrenched that I would expect, some percentage of the consideration will move back into stores eventually, but I think some of it will stick here in digital.
So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We have a question coming in from Jack in Iowa. Jacks like each other, I guess. You talk about social media traffic.
My people.
Right. You talk about social media traffic often being a mile wide and an inch deep. Tell us more about the decreased value of a click and the growing role of research in the path to purchase.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in on this one. This is one of my favorite topics, this notion of mile wide versus inch deep. So social media historically has just driven a lot of activity. It drives a lot of clicks, but those clicks don't always have a high propensity to convert, sort of at the bottom of the funnel. So that's really how I kind of think of it. And that we've had an over-reliance on last click attribution and the sort of things that are very measurable. But there's a lot of activity that influences behavior that doesn't always lead directly to a purchase. So that's all the stuff that happens in this kind of squishy middle of the funnel. And I guess the way that I think of it is look for intermediate metrics where you can that maybe show engagement or consideration. But in the absence of that, have an appreciation for what's happening on social or other content channels where people are being influenced in a way that really drives the brand. Maybe it drives, repeat purchase and loyalty and all those things that really help grow a brand that might not generate, a direct click.
Yeah, Andrew, I couldn't agree more, especially coming from the marketing sciences side. Accurate measurement is really one of the top challenges that brands are trying to solve this year, and one that we're committed, and we have a great team here at Reddit committed to solving. We're seeing a lot of marketers getting really savvy about marketing and measurement, and they are understanding that there's more to an ad's value than just that click. They're asking smart questions like, what's the value of the view? What other down funnel activities are happening, be it search, research on other sites, purchase on other sites, whatever it might be. And while a conversion mechanism is great and built into the platform, that can be good, marketers are starting to ask, how does that build loyalty? Is that building confidence in the purchase? How does that impact LTV, as you just mentioned? And that's what my team and the teams at Reddit are really committed to helping marketers solve.
So I have a follow-up actually on that front. What advice do you have for marketers on Reddit? And actually, Kaylee asked a similar question. What can you do as a brand or advertiser to expand your brand presence or control the message in some way on Reddit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one, again, we have an entire team here, our creative strategy team, and the marketing sciences team dedicated to helping solve. And I think if the pandemic really taught us anything, it's that brands, what consumers value is not that polished brand persona. It's that brands don't need to be polished. They need to be real and honest and showcase the value they're providing. It's a trend that we've been seeing ever since the era of we and working with GWI and the power of community. But the pandemic's really pushed it to a tipping point, and we're starting to see brands that have success now have made that pivot. And so consumers are looking for this honest, authentic information. So taking on a human tone, which can be hard for some brands that have spent a lot of time developing this marketing guidelines, this tone, this polished persona. So if you can develop this human tone, you can provide value and you can contribute on communities. That's really important as well. It's about a value exchange, and that's how you really build trust. You're an active member of the community and you're being honest and transparent. As can be. I can give an example if we have time for that. There was a makeup brand that was gaining real traction on our skincare addiction site community, and all of a sudden somebody brought up that they'd found mold in one of their containers, And it started to get a little bit of traction, this mold in the containers. And all of a sudden the owner came in and replied to all these comments and went really in depth about why it is that such a natural product. There've been some changes in the industry, and why, yes, when having a natural this can happen. They're committed to making it right. They gave an email address. They shipped out more product. They took back the old product. And that transparency, you saw all these Reddit comments about, this is customer service. I will now only buy from this brand. I will help you make this brand better. So it's that sort of one-to-one connection that people are really looking for. And again, I think the pandemic really, made that tipping point and gave a place like Reddit for those conversations to happen for brands and consumers.
So Jeannie and Virginia wanted to ask, and I'm curious about this one too. This is a good one. Do you see the relevance of websites increasing or decreasing as social commerce grows, along with the prominence of other e-commerce marketplaces? And are small businesses still finding some success in this area? Andrew, I know you cover this day and night. So what do you think?
I think the answer is yes to all of those. It's all growing. I mean, there's just a lot more digital activity at every phase of the funnel these days. So we're seeing increases in site traffic and the ways that brands large and small can engage. And then I think obviously there's a growing role here for the intermediaries, the content sites that are supporting this path to purchase. So I don't think of this as a zero-sum game where it shifts between them. The whole ecosystem, the whole pie is really growing at the moment.
I would agree. I was going to use that phrase. The pie is growing, not just the pieces of pie are moving around. I think everything acts as an engine almost, right? And hopefully this engine is really just driving that confidence, driving that trust, and driving people to be really more confident about what they're purchasing and how it's impacting them. So the overall pie is growing. Everything plays off each other, and it's up to everybody to decide what's trustworthy and what is not in their own world.
I think we have time for two more questions. Darren in San Francisco wanted to ask, how do brands reconcile that there are these trusted influencers out there, but you also showed that data that just 2% truly trust social media influencers? Aren't the lines blurring between influencer types?
I think so, and that's part of why I wanted to expand the definition beyond this just social media influencer. Because I don't think there's a lot of trust inherent. Now, it kind of reminds me, there's a poll that gets done every so often, like, approval rating of Congress people. And it's always like single-digit percentages. But then if you ask about what's the approval rating of your congressperson, it's like 60%, right? So in the generic, people may not trust, but it depends. I'm sure every one of these people who doesn't trust social media influencers has a handful of specific ones who they do trust along the way. So it really is, I think for brands, it's about aligning with the right ones. If it's clear that it's just sponsored content, it's people who are just taking a cheap buck, I think audiences can sense that, they can see that. But there are ones where there's an authentic alignment with the brand. I think it can work very well. And then I would say when they're not a well-known personality, if people who are just organically engaging online, you have more trust in them because they're engaging because they care.
Yeah, Andrew, completely agree, and I'll touch on influencers in a second. But the most likely one of the reasons why a lot of brands are into it is also for the entertainment. It's just like an ad, right? It may not be specifically trustworthy, but the entertainment value of influencers and those platforms where they live is high. For trust, the term influencer, Andrew, you were touching on this before, can be anybody that's a trustworthy source, right? And we're seeing that. Online communities where this crowdsourced wisdom acts as an influencer as a whole, it means that's where brands do want to sort of lean and be organically there to interact with their communities, as well as advertise also, so it all sort of plays off each other. But I think that entertainment value is a main piece. And then for trust, again, people are trying to figure out who they trust, who they don't. Influencers, some people trust certain ones, other people trust certain ones. There's probably not going to be influencers where everybody, everybody trusts just one influencer. It's a very individual experience.
You bring up a great point about the community component too, because I think communities kind of check and police each other. So that to me adds another layer of trust, that one person espousing an opinion, you can take that for what it's worth. But when you see a whole community kind of gravitating towards a consensus around things, that's to me an extra layer of trust.
And last but not least, we have Neil in North Carolina who asks, in eMarketer's annual key trends for the year report, you predicted that most people in the US won't make a purchase on social, but instead the focus will be on discovery and consideration. Can you share any examples of brands that are getting consumers to check out successfully?
Yeah, well, so that's very interesting. I still think, checkout is great when you can get it. And I look at it like, if you're going to invest in a channel and you can at least pay for that with the sales that you drive directly, then it gets easier to justify that investment. But so much of that value really is in that middle of the funnel, consideration, discovery. And that's really the power, I think, of social platforms. But there's brands who I think do a nice job in generating conversion around exclusivity. And well, maybe the best example is like Nike will do these shoe drops, right? And you have all these sneaker heads. I mean, the moment they drop a new sneaker through a social media channel, people flood in. So not every brand can do that. For those that can, I would say, to me, that's there's a certain magic in being able to drive that behavior through scarcity and exclusivity.
I'll let Andrew take most of that one because it is an eMarketer statement. But I will just play off that we are definitely seeing that research stage, not only where online communities play, but just that research stage becoming a bigger part of the entire journey. And if that research stage gets bigger, that decision stage becomes smaller. So a lot of the examples that Andrew mentioned, these are people that are in the know. They're constantly researching. They're constantly informed. And that's another part of this as well. People are figuring out where they want to get their information from. They're always on information from as well. So that's going to be a trend that's continuing. And that's where brands are going to want to be also.
So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today, but that was really great, guys. Thanks again to Andrew for joining us, and a very special thanks to Jack and to the team at Reddit. Also, our eMarketer production crew behind the scenes also deserves a huge thank you for making this webinar possible. They're modest. They probably deserve even more than that. And as promised, we're going to be emailing you all soon with a link to the slides and full recording. Before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for upcoming live Analyst and Tech Talk webinars at eMarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, don't forget to tune into Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast at eMarketer.com/podcast. And finally, please check out our newsletters at, you guessed it, eMarketer.com/newsletters. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your workday.